The Die Hard films are a series of action movies that began in 1988 and had their most recent entry in 2013, taking almost $1.5 billion at the box office and producing an immense amount of interest and profit from video games and merchandise. The series follows John McClane, played by Bruce Willis in his most iconic role, as he gets into a number of dangerous situations in which only he can save the day. He's consistently at the wrong place at the wrong time. Willis's role as McClane made him an A-lister, but the role was previously offered to Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds and Richard Gere. The amount of different things that aren't related to each other that happen to McClane are ridiculous, but they're meant to be. One of the reasons Die Hard is such an enduring series is it's got a sense of humour and it's not afraid to poke fun at itself. The first film is based on the 1979 novel Nothing Lasts Forever. Written by Roderick Thorpe, itself a sequel to his earlier novel The Detective, which in turn was adapted for film and saw the titular detective played by Frank Sinatra. Contractually, Sinatra had to be offered the role of McClane, but in his 70s by then, he turned it down. Die Hard takes a fair bit from Nothing Lasts Forever. In the film, McClane is visiting his wife in a big corporate headquarters. In the book, it's his daughter. In the film, Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman, is the suave leader of a German gang who take over the tower. In the book, it's Anton Gruber, and unlike in the film, in the book, the gang is politically motivated. Like the book, there's Sergeant Powell outside, and McClane, in the book Leland, has to walk around barefoot. So the film is about the takeover of the Nakatomi building by a sophisticated gang who want to steal $640 million worth of bearer bonds in the building's vault, but who also want to cover it up by appearing to be terrorists who, if their plan works out, will appear to be killed along with the hostages, enabling them to slip away and earn 20%.
When they touch down, we'll blow the roof. They'll spend a month sifting through the rubble, and by the time they figure out what went wrong, we'll be sitting on a beach, earning 20%.
So, not terrorists, but yes. In a parallel universe, maybe Die Hard is set after this all goes down, and John McClane's plight is all about convincing people that Nakatomi was an inside job. Anyway, these terrorists weren't counting on off-duty New York cop John McClane, who, with a little help from the first officer on the scene, Al Powell, and not much help from the rest of the LAPD, stops the baddies. There's a lot going on in Die Hard. There's many different threads and antagonistic characters. McClane arrives and isn't really impressed with all the Christmas goodwill, because yes, this is a Christmas movie, and someone kisses him.
Jesus. Fucking California.
You just sexually assaulted a police officer. The director, John McTiernan, does a really good job in setting the film up to be a melodrama. McClane and his wife Holly have problems. They sleep in separate bedrooms when they're not sleeping in separate cities. Then they bring this dick into the formula, Ellis, a coked-up executive who's buying John McClane's wife expensive gifts.
It's just a small token of appreciation for all our hard work. It's a Rolex.
He's very deliberately not likeable, and he gets his comeuppance at the hands of Gruber, who I'll talk about more in a moment. But essentially Gruber and Carl, played by Alexander Goodunov, are the faces of the terrorists. Also there's the guy who played Genghis Khan in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Al Leong. Just saying. McClane's contact with the outside world is Sergeant Powell, played by Reginald Vell Johnson, who is at constant loggerheads with the deputy police chief, played by Paul Gleason, and later the FBI. He has his own character arc going on. He accidentally killed a kid, and these days, for some reason, he's more reluctant to discharge his firearm. Also, there's a reporter, Thornburg, played by William Atherton, who threatens the McClane's nanny, interviews their children, and puts Holly's life in danger, and then later gets smacked in the face. I really like Die Hard, but I don't think it's perfect. Many people say it's a very tight film, but I feel that the scenes with McClane and Powell talking on the radio break the pace a bit, and they feel like padding. But this movie has so much going on, it really doesn't need any. I think a lot of the stuff with secondary characters comes from McClane not having an extremely vivid personality or trait. He's not as instantly recognisable as Rambo. He doesn't have that Mel Gibson madness of Riggs from Lethal Weapon. He's very deliberately an everyman. I think this is why they tried to create a very strong supporting cast. So really McClane is someone the audience can project themselves onto and chortle along with when he says one of his one-liners. But the one who really steals the show is Gruber. He's the villain. He's going to kill everyone just to steal some bonds, but there's something very likeable about him, or there is to me. He's very funny.
I must have missed 60 minutes. What are you saying? I read about them in Time magazine. Nice suit. John Phillips, London. I have two myself. Rumor has it Arafat buys his there. Ho, ho, ho.
One of the screenwriters, Stephen E. D'Souza, said he wrote the script as if Gruber were the protagonist. It really shows, and it works. I don't know, maybe I just respect good planning and people who do things. It's not like I sympathise with the rest of the terrorists. The audience isn't really compelled to care about any of them apart from Gruber, but there is a part of me that wants to see him get away with it. Maybe not destroy the tower, though. Did you know that in real life, Nakatomi Plaza is the HQ for 20th Century Fox? Considering Gruber shoots 2 civilians in the head, 12 terrorists are killed, and an FBI helicopter is engulfed in flames, undoubtedly killing all those on board, this really is a very light-hearted movie. I mean, for what must have turned into an international news story, ending with Carl sneaking outside and getting publicly gunned down by Powell, it ends with a kind of all's well that ends well vibe. They just drive off. Yeah, sorry, we're going to have to impound that limo, and don't you want to go to hospital, John? Aren't your feet bleeding? Didn't you get shot? But of course I jest. It's not meant to be taken seriously, and that's why it works. I wouldn't call it campy, and it's certainly not a parody, but it knows what it is without ever letting the audience explicitly know it knows what it is. It brought in $140 million on a $28 million budget. There had to be a sequel, and there was. Die Hard 2. Die Harder. There's a bit of confusion about the Die Harder bit. It was the tagline when it was playing in theatres, and it seems to have been included in the title and some releases. Die Hard knows what it is, but from the point where it called its sequel Die Harder, I think it's been ever more aware and careful to foster a tone of tongue-in-cheek without being outright silly. This time it's based on the book 58 Minutes. John McClane is waiting for his wife at Dulles Airport. He sees some suspicious types sneaking around baggage handling, and he ends up in a gunfight, killing one. They're part of a larger operation by rogue military elements to free General Esperanza, a previously US-backed strongman in Honduras. The bad guy is an unbalanced colonel. The good guys don't know what the heck is going on, and Robert Patrick fails to turn into liquid metal. Holly returns, trapped in an endless holding pattern, as does Thornburg. Then we get a shot of Col Meany, out of the engineering room, and this time piloting a Windsor airline. I guess BA wouldn't let them use their name.
Oh, hey. We're just like British Rail, love. We may be late, but we get you there.
So that plane gets tricked by the terrorists into flying into the runway.
We've got you.
McClane tries to detain Esperanza himself. He then tracks the terrorists down to a church, which is assaulted by a counter-terrorism army unit, who later turn out to be in on the entire scheme. McClane works out what's going on and blows up the bad guy's plane, and it ends like this.
You get this parking ticket in front of my airport?
Yeah.
What the hell? It's Christmas!
All's well that ends well. Well, apart from the hundreds of people who've died. But again, it's tongue-in-cheek. We all know that if this really happened, they wouldn't send an army unit, they'd send the army. Die Hard 2 has many of the same beats. There's a kind of vibe which is like anti-senior police. Both it and its predecessor seem to take a shot at police organisation, which isn't there in later films. The police captain, Lorenzo, is an asshole, never-endingly shouting at McClane.
McClane, what the hell you think you're doing out there? I'm playing John Wayne?
Although maybe he does have a point, which I'll talk about in a minute. Also, there are lots of callbacks.
Oh man, I can't fucking believe this. Another basement, another elevator. How can the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
In my opinion, this isn't a sloppy sequel. I don't think it quite matches up to Die Hard, but I do see it as an attempt to refine and reproduce the formula rather than just copy it. There's two problems. The first is, in Die Hard, McClane was trapped in the tower with the terrorists. He had to fight them, otherwise he and everyone else was dead. In Die Hard 2, he recurringly finds himself back in safety, then pushes himself back into the action. There are reasons for this. He's the only one there, the police don't listen to him, and so on. But as it goes on, it loses any sense of him being backed into a corner and having to use his wits to defeat a numerically superior foe. Die Hard was more cat and mouse, and in this film, McClane is on the offensive most of the time. And again, I know this isn't meant to be a super realistic film or anything like that, but the end game involves McClane trying to stop the terrorists from escaping and blowing up their plane to do so. But once they're gone, there's nothing stopping the airport from bringing the circling planes overhead back to the ground. They could light the runway with the fire themselves. And they're in Virginia. I'm pretty sure if the US Air Force wanted them out of the sky, they could make that happen in about 3 minutes. Again, I'm not trying to pick holes, it's just that I think without the peril of the first, where the terrorists are going to kill the hostages and then Holly is in danger, the finale of Die Hard 2 is a little lackluster. The second problem, I think they realised somewhere in the production of Die Hard 2, and certainly before Die Hard 3, is John McClane is a normal guy. Maybe an aspirational normal guy, but a relatable character. The really interesting and charismatic character in Die Hard is Gruber, and I think they must have realised this somewhere in Die Hard 2's production because there are so many secondary characters. They even bring back Powell, but just for a single scene. The subplot of Holly and Thornburg on a plane overhead isn't really consequential, and all of the time these characters are on screen seems to be divided pretty equally. So we never really get to know any of them. The bad guy this time seems to be a bit of a caricature, but that's maybe down to him not really having enough to do. D'Souza was again one of the screenwriters, this time with Doug Richardson instead of Jeb Stewart, so I'm sure the value of having a strong secondary character was known. Anyway, the film made $100 million more worldwide than the first. There had to be another. Die Hard 3 explains itself pretty well here.
There's a guy out there setting off bombs. He calls himself Simon. He speaks with a German accent. And for some reason, he's very angry with me.
So, to fill in the blanks, Simon Gruber wants revenge, but he also wants to rob the Federal Reserve. Who doesn't? McClane's first task, co-opted by a police force who totally won't respond to terrorists' demands no matter how wacky, is to put himself in terrible danger, where he meets Zeus, played by Samuel L. Jackson.
Hey, Zeus, he's a friend of yours? He looked like a friend of mine.
Forced together, much of the screen time is shared with Zeus, but also taken a bit by the subplot, about the police trying to find and then defuse a bomb in a school. The film dispenses with a lot in the first two. Holly isn't there, neither are Thornburg or Powell, and there isn't the same antagonism towards police organisation. McTiernan is back in the director's chair, and I have a feeling he wanted a film that didn't go through the exact same formula. Instead, McTiernan seems to try and take what he found from Die Hard and up the ante. Personally, I would find it hard to choose which is my favourite, the first or the third. I know for most people it's the first, but I kind of think that the third has better pacing. Again, it's all about refinement. The pacing is so much tighter. They've planed off superfluous elements, and the on-screen chemistry between McClane and Zeus really works. I also think it has the best joke in the entire series.
Are you aiming for these people? No. Maybe that's mine.
The relationship between Zeus and McClane really carries this movie, and you can tell that before the script was repurposed, it was destined for the Lethal Weapon series. And incidentally before that, it was going to be called Simon Says and be a vehicle for Brandon Lee. Some of the reviews at the time were pretty negative, and of course not everyone now is going to agree with me that this is the paciest and more entertaining in the series. Jeremy Irons' Simon is nowhere near as compelling as Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber, and without retreading the idea of being trapped in something like a tower, it loses its claustrophobia. Still, the film is breathless, like a modern-day and slightly insane swashbuckler. Its critical difference to the previous two films is that McClane is comparatively free, and he's joined by a co-star. Samuel L. Jackson is just as important to Die Hard 3 as Bruce Willis is. He's not a secondary character, he's a primary one.
Right now, get out the damn phone, lady. Police business.
It was the highest grossing movie of 1995 and took in a worldwide gross of $366 million. Now before we leave Die Hard 3, there's two things I want to point out. First, there's an alternative ending where Simon gets away, but McClane tracks him down and makes him play Russian roulette with a rocket launcher. Secondly, there are these two 90s references, which I just found amusing.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
You think you are, Lady Hillary Clinton?
They're shutting down the police band.
All calls will be coming through this switchboard.
And I'm gonna marry Donald Trump.
I don't think you are. Die Hard 4.0, as it's often called outside of the States, is based on an article called Fire Sale that appeared in Wired in 1997. McClane has to escort a hacker, played by Justin Long, to the FBI for interrogation about a breach in security, where he comes under fire. Hackers and henchmen under Thomas Gabriel, played by Timothy Olyphant, digitally take control of various infrastructural elements in the US. Gabriel aims to rip off all the financial data in the US, which automatically downloads to a secret data center that Gabriel himself helped design. On the way, he takes McClane's daughter hostage. But of course, McClane triumphs. The original script was called WW3.com and featured many of the cyber attack elements we see in Die Hard 4.0, /Live Free and Die Hard. The September 11th attacks ended up stalling the movie. It does, after all, depict terrorist actions, not least this, as it turns out fake, destruction of the Capitol building. Obviously, this film couldn't get away with much that its predecessors had. Terrorists wanting to blow up towers, crashing airliners full of people into tarmac, with the same boisterous don't take it seriously sort of handling. The film is still tongue-in-cheek, and I wouldn't call it more serious, it's just far less jokey. I think for a movie that comes 12 years after its predecessor, it does an okay job of continuing the characteristics of McClane and the ridiculous action in much the same tone. I like Timothy Olyphant's Gabriel. He seems far less cartoony than Jeremy Irons' villain. The character of Matt is believable, I just don't think he's incredibly compelling. He's important in the same way Zeus was important. He gives the "oh god dead people" perspective, as McClane steps over terrorists who've been cut into two. But personally, I'd have liked to have seen him be a bit more of a comic relief character. The film was partly shot in 2 ways, and edited to obtain a PG-13 rating, something Bruce Willis wasn't happy with. What can I say? Watch the uncut version. Now really, if you look at it on paper, Die Hard 4 isn't that different to the first 3, but it isn't the same. By 2007, action films had inevitably changed from the late 80s and early 90s. It's almost intangible. It's like if someone remade Citizen Kane shot for shot with the exact same script. It wouldn't be the same. It's not part of that wave of films that came out in the 40s. The handling would be different. The style of action from the 80s and 90s was at first less, but progressively more, reliant on big special effects. These are impressive as they are ridiculous in film 4, and some of the CG looks a little flabby now. But they all add to the over-the-top entertainment. I think it's worth saying that McClane has become more jaded, but at the same time seems to have transformed from a cop in the wrong place at the wrong time to a McClane-shaped superhero. It somewhat feels like Rambo 2 or 3, where McClane has become a component of the action rather than a character trying to escape it or driving it. I think that's probably something that's ramped up since Die Hard 2, but is much more prevalent in 4 and 5. But for all of McClane fighting on an F-35 and taking down helicopters, I don't think any of that is as tense and as fun as McClane and Zeus driving through Central Park in a cab. I don't know, maybe I just like watching grown men scream at each other. Die Hard 4, as much as it doesn't have that, I think still fits into the series. The director, Len Wiseman, and the scriptwriters obviously knew the importance of strong secondary characters. It's undoubtedly less fresh. It is the 4th in the series. And I guess they could never find anyone with as much on-screen charisma as Samuel L. Jackson to be the co-star. But at least it tries to be a Die Hard. Which brings me to Die Hard 5. Die Hard 5, Die Harderer, no not really, sees McClane visit Moscow to find out what happened to his son, Jack, who appears to be in a Russian jail. It turns out, in fact, Jack is with the CIA and is tasked with aiding political prisoner Komarov. McClane's arrival, of course, messes everything up. So Big McClane and Little McClane, after a secret file now that Big McClane has found himself at a loose end and why not, look for Komarov's daughter, who betrays her own father. The McClanes lose Komarov, but follow him and his kidnappers, working for a corrupt Russian official, to Chernobyl, where it turns out Komarov was a bad guy all along, and he and his daughter intend to steal $1 billion worth of weapons-grade uranium. And the McClanes stop them. As well as Robert Patrick, Jai Courtney, who plays Jack McClane, appears in both the Die Hard and Terminator series. He plays Kyle Reese in Terminator Genesis. What an honour. The reason I bring that up is because A Good Day to Die Hard is like Genesis, in that it almost appears to be a parody of itself. This bit especially reminded me of Genesis.
So that's not your thing, John. What's mine? Fucking killing bad guys, that's your thing!
Gone is the tension of a gunfight. Gone is the McClane who's just a normal guy under pressure. It's almost like Willis did his own spoof. You see, it isn't a parody of itself. It doesn't have the self-awareness for that. Rather, it almost seems to be that they tried to continue their process of refinement, but instead of capitalising on a brilliant formula in Die Hard, they removed all characterisation, all nuance, and a good portion of story and replaced it with action. The film is a complete departure. Die Hard is meant to be about John McClane and a little bit about the villain. And if Die Hard 4 saw McClane become a small component of the action, Die Hard 5 sees him become an invisible one. All the humour in this film is from McClane, but apart from that, Willis has little to work with to make his character empathetic, or, well, anything. In Die Hard 3, Jeremy Irons doesn't appear until the 47th minute. Now you can criticise his character as a caricature, you can criticise his accent, but at least at the end, you have a good idea of who he is and what he's about. In Die Hard 4, Timothy Olyphant doesn't have the charisma of Hans Gruber, but there were little windows into his past. He was intense, and you could tell things were going on. He had emotions. I'm not saying all of this just to pan Die Hard 5. I don't think it's as terrible as some people say, but it is bad. But rather, these differences are critical. There's no well-defined villain. We don't even realise who the bad guy is until about 80% in. Arguably number 4 was pretty weak on this front too, but here, McClane Jr. could just do it all. It feels more like Tango and Cash than Die Hard. Sam Jackson wasn't there to be another gun, and neither was Justin Long. Dennis Franz's Carmine Lorenzo was an antagonistic captain who had a personality and helped define McClane's. They were there to provide a witty side to McClane, and a side that wasn't so used to snuffing people out. I think it's very rare that you find a film where the two leads have the same personality, and Die Hard 5 isn't one of those films because the two leads have no personality. I'm sorry, but I just can't be nice to it. The only real similarity this film has to other Die Hard films is that Willis is trying to do McClane, but he just doesn't have enough lines. I honestly think with Die Hard 5, they could have just given it a different name and not called it Die Hard, and no one would have ever said, this is like Die Hard, because it's not. So we've seen how Die Hard has changed, not as much as many other series, but its consistency certainly has been diluted in the last 2 outings. It helped to define modern action with a likeable hero who is normal and funny.
I was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually.
Well, it looks like Die Hard 6 is going to be a prequel and will feature Bruce Willis in some capacity. I'd love to know what you guys think about that and what you think about the series as a whole. As ever, thanks for joining me. Make sure you leave a like, and if you're not subscribed already,
Welcome to the party, pal!
Next time I'll be looking at Kubrick's first feature film, Fear and Desire. I'd like to thank everyone who voted on the lava lamp. The result was overwhelmingly in favour of keeping the lamp, so that's what I'm going to do. And I guess when I build a bigger studio, I'll keep it then as well, because it was 98%. In fact, I'm starting to think that maybe I should get a second lava lamp. I mean, what if actually people are just coming for the lava lamp? Should the lava lamp get its own channel? I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. And I guess
Jesus. Whoa!